uncertainty. Chapter 711 Legacy Trial by Hideousbrain. Unsure of how much time had passed since the fifth trial started, Jason finally answered the last question. The questions had been extremely difficult to answer despite the fact that they were simply asking for one's honesty. However, that was the essential point to remain honest. Jason had to face many moments in which he wanted to answer specific questions with a slightly tweaked answer instead of stating everything honestly. Once he was done, he was immediately enveloped in a white shroud before the familiar robotic voice resounded in his mind. Fifth trial completed. 99% honest. Extraordinary achievement. Passed. All trials have been successfully passed. Teleportation to Legacy Hall will be initiated. With these notifications resounding in his head, the white shroud took him away, before releasing him in front of a gigantic mansion. It was constructed out of black stones called basalt and all kinds of other unique materials which made the huge mansion look magnificent. There were also other buildings around, but Jason was only focused on the mansion because he could see Jennifer's energy fluctuations from within. It looked like she was resting, which astonished Jason, but the robotic voice that appeared in his head once again explained the situation. All participants have completed the trials of strength, intelligence, talent, pressure, and honesty. Ranking will be created, and merit points will be distributed. Both finalists have earned enough merit points to face the legacy trial to receive the main inheritance. Only one individual will be able to procure it. After procuring the inheritance, an adjustment period of 3 months will be initiated, and the inheritor will be released outside Kinra Island to prevent accidents from occurring. Jason didn't expect to receive so much information, even less because the robotic voice had always been reticent. However, now this seemed to have changed, which was quite advantageous. Knowing the necessary intel was important, and given the fact that both he and Jennifer were eligible to procure the main inheritance made him feel Jason reassured. I wonder what kind of reward I can choose from. The adjustment period of 3 months was extremely helpful for Jennifer, but Jason couldn't help but wonder when he will have to leave the inheritance site. It would be disadvantageous to leave the inheritance site alone, but Jason didn't believe that he would be allowed to leave with Jennifer in a few months after she procured the entire legacy. If I can choose to be teleported to a different location of the island as a reward, I should probably pick that. The Preactors will definitely try to kill me for destroying their plan, and as a punishment for procuring the items that had been stolen by the traitor of their race. It was annoying, but Jason was also fully aware that kicking them out of the inheritance site had been the only way of ensuring that they stayed alive. The wrath of each Preactor was nothing to be taken lightly, after all. Looking around the new place he had entered, Jason saw all kinds of buildings and constructions. Yet, instead of being distracted from his path towards Jennifer, he took one step after another to the mansion. Nevertheless, he wanted to make full use of his Emperor eyes, which made him watch everyone thoroughly. Because of that, it took him a while before he entered the mansion, where Jennifer was already waiting for him, pacing impatiently. "Jason, you are finally here," Jennifer exclaimed in relief, the moment Jason opened the large door to enter the mansion. "Why finally? I shouldn't have taken much longer than you. Or did you rush through the questions?" His voice was not supposed to sound offensive, but Jennifer could only smile dryly when she heard him. "Well, I might have answered the questions a little bit too hurriedly. My passing score for the last round was the lowest amongst all trials. It was even worse than the second trial about the maze." Sigh, Jason nodded his head, his lips curling upwards slightly as he replied. "Well, that's fine, I guess. You were also able to reach the threshold to enter the legacy trial. Reassuring her, Jason's words allowed Jennifer to feel less embarrassed as she voiced her opinion. That's true. But if I'm able to procure the main inheritance, it will take a few months to adjust, and I doubt that you can stay that long inside the inheritance site. Before I enter the legacy trial, we will have to find a way for you to leave safely without encountering the preactors. What's the use, if I can obtain the main inheritance, but you die? That would be a loss in every possible way. Jennifer sounded determined to find a solution for Jason, and somehow, it felt as if she was even more eager to find a solution to his issue than anything else. Jason was not sure what had happened in the fourth trial, but it looked like he wasn't the only one who felt that something about him had changed. Ever since he had felt Jennifer's warmth and the security she wanted to provide him with, Jason couldn't help but feel weird, different, every time he looked at her. Never having felt like this, Jason had yet to figure out what exactly it was, but he had one specific assumption. It would make sense, but at the same time, he didn't think that he had time for this, and Jennifer probably felt the exact same. In the end, both of them were extremely busy, and in the era of cultivation, it was unlikely to be together all the time. As such, it was almost impossible for cultivators in a relationship to spend all day around each other. There was no time if one pursued strength and different goals. Yet, Jason felt that he was starting to like Jennifer. Scratching the back of his head, he couldn't help but sigh when he realized that this might be the case, only to try changing his train of thoughts. The rewards that I receive from the inheritance site should be able to help me out with this. I doubt that any inheritance site would forget to create a specific mechanism to avoid its former participants from being killed and robbed while they wait at the portal entrance. An alliance of greedy participants who planned to attack those who had successfully reaped the rewards should have existed a long time ago already. As such, I don't think you should worry too much. Rather, you can search for the portal that leads towards the legacy trial. Jennifer couldn't help but frown when she heard how nonchalant Jason was. At the same time, she felt as if he was avoiding spending some more time with her, which didn't make her feel any better. Thus, Jennifer glared at him with piercing eyes. Seeing this, Jason had to try hard not to smile childishly before he suggested. Before entering new dangers, one should always rest a little bit. So, how about we take a look at the rewards? I have no idea how the reward system works here. Have you heard something about it from Luna? Right now, Jason didn't even know how many merit points he had, which was something he should figure out first. Fortunately, he had Jennifer by his side, and she knew almost everything that he required to know. First, she pointed towards a wall where the ranking was displayed, including the merit points. Oh. I didn't expect to have so many merit points. That's quite a surprise, isn't it? Jason said, with a teasing tone in his voice. This caused Jennifer to roll her eyes, knowing that he wanted to provoke her for earning more merit points than she had. Yet, despite knowing this, she fell right into his trap, which Jason found amusing. Yes. You are so great, do you want to spar a little bit? Chapter 712 Repaying Debt by Hideousgrain. Jason politely rejected the spar, with a vibrant smile on his face that caused Jennifer to feel even more provoked. However, after forcing herself to calm down, she dropped the topic before explaining to Jason everything she knew. While listening to her intently, Jason noticed in no time that Jennifer's information was not exactly unique. It just included the basics which he could have figured out on his own too. Next time, I'll read the basic information about inheritance sites too. After getting to know the amount of merit points he had procured, the reward system explained itself quite easily. By touching something, one could find out how many merit points one had to pay in order to purchase it. That was interesting and well thought of, considering that there was also the possibility of being rewarded with just anything, instead of being able to choose. Being able to choose one big, or multiple small rewards that were suitable to the given situation to the respective individual, was extremely important. As such, Jason couldn't help but feel satisfied with everything about the space that was more like a gigantic warehouse with a small town of magnificent building structures inside it. Walking around the town with Jennifer next to him, they were able to release the tension that had accumulated within them throughout the last few weeks. Cultivating and becoming stronger was important, but without some time off, they wouldn't be able to live properly. Spending time with others, and doing seemingly unimportant things was a necessity to relax, even if Jason had never thought of it that way. In the end, it worked wonders, and walking around the small town as if they were casually strolling through a market, gave them the opportunity to talk a lot. Both felt that their friendship was transforming into something new and different, but neither wanted to acknowledge it, feeling nervous and unsure of the unknown. Feeling a little bit awkward in the beginning, they had overcome it and begun to speak about the items they found, and what the best rewards would be for Jason and Jennifer. At the same time, they searched for the Immortal Eye, which Luna required for something Jason had yet to figure out. In order to thank Luna for the mythic essence cultivation technique, procuring the Immortal Eye was the bare minimum he could do. At least that was what Jason believed, because the mythic essence technique was worth much more than the Immortal Eye. Jason was of that opinion, and even if it was true, Luna required the Immortal Eye much more than the mythic essence technique that had lost some of its earlier importance to her because she had studied it for decades already. As such, she knew every single word on each page of the book by heart. Owing to this, the technique was less valuable to her than an Immortal Eye, in addition to Jason protecting Jennifer by all means. Luna's assumption that Jason would prove to be a valuable ally to Jennifer at the inheritance site was spot on, because he had protected her from the preactors that would have killed her otherwise. Thus, her investment in Jason was worth it, as he had lived to her expectations and saved Jennifer. However, her investment was even more worthwhile when they found a translucent orb that was the size of a small child's head. While the first layer was translucent, the inner parts were silver with a pitch-black emblem of an eye visible through the translucent membrane. Looking at the eye, Jason felt as if he was drawn towards it, and only by inserting some mana into the Emperor eyes was he finally able to avert his attention. After that, he was able to see the price of the Immortal Eye for the first time, which astonished Jason. The Immortal Eye is quite cheap, isn't it? Why did Luna make such a fuss about it? Right now, they were standing in the middle of an ancient-looking accessory shop, and Jason couldn't help but feel that the other items on display were more impressive, similar to their prices. This caused Jennifer to look at Jason dumbfoundedly, as if she wanted to ask, "Are you stupid?" Fortunately, she held back, thinking that he was just too naive, and dazzled by his own strength and talent, making him forget how others would struggle to even finish the first trial. Those that choose to enter the Legacy trial are unable to use their merit points because they're utilized to increase the time one has to finish the given trial. That's why Luna never procured the Immortal Eye. Furthermore, it was quite rare to get as many merit points as I, let alone you have. Don't think that the other trials are easy like this one. We were just fortunate because the trial was never used. It's possible that the artificial intelligence of the trial lowered the requirements to find a new successor. Nodding his head, Jason understood what she said to some extent. There were some things he was not sure of, such as questioning the reason for the artificial intelligence, which was probably the robotic voice, to decrease the trial's difficulty. If someone was searching for a suitable inheritor, one wouldn't want to find someone worse, but the best of the best. As such, the time required to find an inheritor shouldn't matter. Yet, that was exactly what seemed to have happened. Is that why I received 1,111 merit points? He wondered while looking at the relatively cheap price of 100 merit points for the Immortal Eye. Pondering about it, Jason sensed that his performance in the 5 trials was exceptional. That was if one excluded the talent trial because Petrie and Spyro had been forced to solve the prior and spiral mastery orbs. However, taking the help of his soul bonds didn't seem to have deducted his points. Rather, revealing every single trait of his without shying away might have been the reason for him to receive that many merit points, to begin with. At the same time, Jennifer might be mistaken that everything was easy because she struggled in the maze trial, and the 4th trial was probably the most difficult for her. It was just that the 4th trial ended abruptly without a given reason. As such, Jason believed that Jennifer underestimated the mission, while he had only underestimated the prices, as he expected the Immortal Eye to be priced at 500 or even 1,000 merit points. Grasping the Immortal Eye, Jason stored it inside his spatial ring without bothering about it further. He knew a few characteristics of the Immortal Eye, and it was because of this that he believed that Luna wanted to create an indestructible weapon. However, that was not something he could be certain of, yet. Now, with the Immortal Eye procured, Jason tried to find something useful for 1,000 merit points. In the end, with that many merit points left, he could choose nearly everything he wanted, but that was exactly the problem. The wide variety of items he could choose from confused him. Yet, just as they were about to continue walking through the small town, the robotic voice resounded in their head once again. The portal to the Legacy trial will close in 10 minutes. Upon hearing the announcement, Jennifer bid farewell to Jason without having found a solution to the issue he might face once he left the inheritance site. Yet, that was not something Jason found to be problematic, as he had already seen something that could help him. As such, he waved at Jennifer with a bright smile, only to see concern in her eyes, which warmed Jason's heart. She is a nice girl. Chapter 713 Garden by Hideousgrain. Jason's eyes were gleaming brightly, and his joy was noticeable even from thousands of meters away. His aura was flickering wildly too, and all of this was just because he found a huge garden. It had been hidden from his sight before, but now that he found a garden, Jason couldn't help but forget the items he had seen before. There had been dozens of extremely rare items that had attracted his interest, but all of them were insignificant compared to what was in front of him at the moment. His hands reached for the plants. As he brushed his fingers through the leaves, and his brain received an influx of information that streamed into his mind, including the price of the plants. This was an exceptional help, and Jason's bright smile widened even further. After spending a few hours inside the garden, Jason became even more excited. His brain was processing everything, and Jason was already trying to put a plan together for what he was trying to get his hand on. The Prior Marist or Spiral Cricula Minatra flowers are exceptional, but quite expensive. Does their scent really allow beasts of the respective cultivation path to circulate their cultivating energy through their body? Isn't that like a drug, and harmful over a long duration, too? The Cricula Minatra flower was what attracted Jason's attention the most. Through the scent it released, beasts were said to be able to cultivate faster. At least that was what the information he received stated. Furthermore, a maximum of 3 Minatra flowers of the same kind could work in sync to create overlapping effects and amplify each other. Thus, Jason knew that he would have to purchase 3 Cricula Minatra flowers of all 3 cultivation paths. According to the information he was provided, each of them was priced at 33 merit points, but that shouldn't be too high, considering that they had already been on the brink of extinction when the inheritance site had been constructed. At least that was what the provided information stated. Through this, Jason realized that they should have gone extinct by now, making him feel more inclined to purchase them. However, Jason also knew that his soul world did not have a high amount of the three cultivating energies. Everything came from the plants and inanimate objects that were intertwined with the energy after all. As such, Jason had to actively increase the number or quality of plants that could release the energies, otherwise, the soul world's energies would just remain stagnant. This was not necessarily bad, but rather counterproductive because Jason wanted his soul bonds to progress even faster than he could. That was at least what he hoped would happen because he had seen it occur in the past. Unfortunately, for such a scenario to occur once again, Artemis, Petri, and Spyro would have to be at the Prisma stage armed with several solidified prismarine crystals at that. It would take some time, but Jason was sure that if he were to consistently customize and improve his soul world, his soul bonds would at least be able to keep up with him. This was also the reason for him to purchase the Cricula Minatra flowers despite deducting 30% of his merit points for barely 9 flowers. However, what followed suit caused even Jason to feel a little bit sorry. After binding the flowers to his soul and planting them with the help of Spyro who could transform its body into all kinds of shapes, Jason used his Emperor eyes once again. Through this, he was able to find the most suitable young plants, including those with higher quality, or extremely cheap ones that generated a tremendous amount of mana, spirit force, or primordial energy. Jason was excited, and his plan was to use the remaining 700 merit points to purchase all kinds of plants. In his excitement, he had forgotten to even look at other objects he might require later. Instead, he simply continued to customize his soul world, turning it into the best place to cultivate he had ever seen. Never could he have expected that the inheritance site would be of such great help to customize his ginormous soul world. Thus, he was delighted to learn that even a single merit point was already enough to purchase a huge bush that radiated tremendous amounts of mana. The purchases he made might not be enough to allow hundreds of beings to cultivate, but right now, he had only 4 soul bonds, one of each cultivation path, and Artemis, who was occupied with her evolution. As such, each energy could be used by 1 soul bond alone. With that knowledge, Jason knew that he could stop with his shopping after spending a few dozen merit points in total. However, after realizing that the Cricula Minatra flowers scent was even more potent than he had expected, his expenses skyrocketed as he bought more than intended. Turning the soul world into a holy land for his soul bonds was the most important, and he wanted their strength to soar just like his own. Given the extremely cheap prices the ancient plants had, how could Jason now know that he was making a huge bargain? It allowed him to receive something that would change everything about his soul bond's cultivation speed, after all. He was not sure how much time had passed, but given his exhaustion and heavily aching head, Jason knew that he needed a break. In the end, he had purchased more than 100 plants, leaving him with just 10 merit points. It was an exceptional purchase, and Jason couldn't help but smile looking at the dozens of plants that were just waiting for him to plant them into the soul world. The first thing he did after purchasing them was to bind them to his soul. This had proved to be an extremely arduous task, exhausting him a lot, but owing to his soul bond's demands, he was further forced to design the space according to their wishes. Jason didn't dislike this, but it was a little bit of a hassle, considering that he was already exhausted. Nevertheless, he paid heed to his soulbond's wishes, only to slump to the ground when he couldn't move anymore. Taking a break, he lay on the ground as his soulbonds reported the potency of the Criculaminatra flowers sent to him. Hearing the report was extremely motivating because Petri assumed that his cultivation speed would increase by at least 3 times, if not more. Calling this exceptional was an understatement, and Jason couldn't help but feel overjoyed about his decision of purchasing the flowers that were the most expensive plants in the entire garden. After what felt like an eternity, Jason had finally finished everything necessary, and the plants were all planted in the soul world. The amount of cultivation energies exceeded the amount of energy required by his soulbonds overall, but that was no problem because his soulbonds would continue to grow, and require more and more energy to keep getting stronger. As such, Jason was glad to have an excessive amount of generated energy, which meant that he wouldn't have to improve his soul world's state for quite some time. After resting a little, he got up from the ground, as he mumbled, "Now I should use the remaining coins to let myself be teleported as far from the portal as possible. I don't want to encounter these annoying preactors, after all." With a faint smile on his face, Jason mumbled, only to approach the mansion, where he had seen a simple sign with teleportation, -1 megapixel, on it. Jennifer didn't seem to have seen this sign before, but Jason's emperor eyes fortunately had. Because of that, he hadn't been worried about anything at all, and the -1 megapixel indicated that he could freely choose how many merit points he wanted to use. As such, worrying about his departure was the last thing on his mind. Rather, it was the only joy because of the massive purchase he made today, helping the cultivation speed of his soulbonds improve to a whole new level. Through this, he allowed his soulbonds to catch up to his progress, or at least he thought so, and this was more than necessary because the dangers looming around him were much more than he could ever imagine. Chapter 714 Time by Hideousgrain. When Jason had accessed the reward to be teleported away, he could choose any destination inside Kinra Island that cost only 10 merit points. This was more than enough to allow him to enter the center of the island that was quite far away. With this knowledge, Jason could have left immediately. However, after giving it another thought, he realized that the artificial intelligence had yet to throw him out of the inheritance site. As such, he was not forced to leave. It didn't mean that he had to stay either, but the cultivation energies in his surroundings were much denser than anywhere else. Because of that, it wouldn't be bad to spend some time cultivating in the garden. Without Jennifer around, he was too weak on his own, and his combat prowess was supposed to be much higher than it was currently. The best for him would be to reach a level similar to someone on the peak of the Lick stage. Unfortunately, this was unlikely to happen during the next few months, even with the use of his extraordinary prismarine crystals. Maybe I should just spend a month or 2 inside the inheritance site, that is, if it's possible. He was not sure when he would be thrown out, but that was not exactly bothersome. If his assumption was correct, the AI would expel him from the inheritance site once Jennifer finished the legacy trial. Afterward, Jennifer would receive the main inheritance, to which she would have to adjust herself in 3 months. It was only Jason's assumption, but in the end, it didn't matter when exactly he would have to leave the inheritance site. For now, he could cultivate, while the same applied to his soulbonds. While SPYR, Petri, and Solaris were using the overflowing energies to strengthen themselves, Artemis was already absorbing large amounts of mana to accelerate her evolution. This was good news for Jason, who estimated that it would take less than 4 months for her to finish the second evolution. With that in mind, he sat down next to the sign of the teleportation reward before starting to cultivate with the mythic essence technique utilized. Using the technique was still extremely painful, but it had slowly begun to become less burdensome. As such, Jason was finally able to cultivate and felt less pain, followed by accelerated progress, owing to the stigma and his Celestia aura that had been enhanced by the unsealed Celestia bloodline. But that was not all, because Jason's mana mastery had increased tremendously, which was also an effect of breaking many of the minor seals that protected him from his own bloodline. Because of that, his cultivation speed accelerated further, allowing Jason to liquefy much more than 100 drops of mana in a single day. Thus, in a span of less than 2 months, he was able to liquefy a total of 10,000 mana drops, before Jason started the solidification process of the accumulated mana drops in order to create the second prismarine crystal. This would take at least 2 months, but Jason felt that it was still extremely fast. Being able to create one solidified prismarine crystal in 4 months was exceptional, yet, Jason was not the only one who advanced so rapidly. Petri had only been at the 9th Lick stage when they had entered the inheritance trial, but that had changed too. Owing to the Criculum Anatra flowers, Petri's cultivation speed increased rapidly. And by activating their stigma inside the soul world, his soul bonds further accelerated every process about their respective cultivation energy. Even Spyro, who had taken a long time to construct the Celestia race's stigma, could activate it, owing to the firm connection it had with Jason, thereby overlapping its effect with the other stigmas. Because of the 3 stigmas that were activated inside the soul world, they could cultivate much faster than Jason had expected, giving him a huge surprise as Petri was already halfway through the construction of his first prismarine crystal. Initially, Jason thought that prior beings were different from Spiral and Maris beings, but what he hadn't known was that their liquefied primordial energy was stored within their cells. However, the moment they reached the Prisma stage, their liquefied primordial energy would also be solidified. The sole difference would be that it was a little bit more burdensome to accumulate the liquefied primordial energy from all corners of the body. Nevertheless, the cultivation process was similar, if not identical, with all 3 main cultivation paths. If one were to ignore the location where the process was initiated, this was quite intriguing, but also something Jason had to figure out later. While Petri was halfway through the Prisma stage, Solaris had finally created its second prismarine crystal, increasing its strength tremendously. Other than that, it seemed as if Solaris had already gathered enough liquefied mana during the last few months in order to create the third prismarine crystal. This had astonished Jason because he hadn't expected Solaris to accumulate mana while simultaneously constructing a prismarine crystal. Such a feat was exceptional, and Jason was proud of the Black Origin Flame. The only issue was that it devoured more soul energy and crystals than any kind of beast he had bound to his soul. Adding the high consumption of his soul bonds to binding all kinds of plants to his soul world, the number of soul crystals and soul energy he had was dwindling at a rapid pace. This was bad because Artemis would soon complete her evolution, and she was bound to become much stronger, consequently demanding more resources from him. The first threshold of the Prisma stage with the creation of 9 small solidified crystals was only the beginning, and Jason hoped that she wouldn't advance too far, otherwise, a seemingly familiar scenario would repeat itself. After Artemis' first evolution, she required a lot more soul energy too and was thus forced to remain outside the soul world. Jason didn't want this to happen again, even less inside the inheritance site, where exotic beasts might be captured or even hunted. The thought alone was scary enough, and Jason's entire body trembled because of that. As such, Jason finally decided to improve the repetitive cycle of soul energy that was situated within his second sub-area. His brain had been enhanced following the advancement in cultivation, which was only increased further by Spyro's tremendous advancement to the 5th Flick stage in just a few months. Its talent was exceptional, and Jason had yet to figure out more about his newest soul bond. However, what he knew was that the soul world's amplification of 40% further enhanced Jason's brain functions by a lot. Spyro was a spiral beast, and even without the need for Jason to cultivate in the spiral path, he could receive its amplification, just like it was the case with Petri. Because of the tremendous enhancements Jason underwent, he was confident to leave the inheritance site, even if he was not yet thrown out of it. He was bothered by the thought that being expelled would teleport him straight to the temple, and that was the last place he wanted to be the moment he emerged on Kinra Island once again. As such, Jason decided to use the teleportation reward and the remaining 10 merit points to be teleported to the center of the island, where he hoped to get some time to create the advanced soul energy cycle. How could Jason have known that this decision was a big mistake because the center of Kinra Island was not as safe as it had been the first time he flew past it with Jennifer by his side? Chapter 715 Hunters by Hideousgrain. After being teleported to the center of Kinra Island, Jason had the urge to take in a deep breath of fresh air. However, the moment he did this, it was as if the air got stuck in his throat as he saw the crowd of several hundred beings roaming around. This caused him to freeze in place before he took a look around to see thousands of mansion-sized tents, and even some newly built buildings and other complexes. Shock was too light of a word to describe what Jason was feeling, and it was more like he was utterly dumbfounded. He had assumed to encounter a few individuals in the island's center, but to think that a large town of countless tents had been constructed was extremely weird. Jason couldn't believe it at first, and it took him some time to accept reality and the fact that more than a dozen races had met up as if they were just on Kinra Island to have a gathering. Initially, he believed Luna, who had told him that everyone would try to tear each other apart. However, that didn't seem to be the case at all. Whether it was because of the other races that had forcefully entered Kinra Island, or because of a different reason, Jason didn't know. However, what he knew was that there were a few races he already knew of. Amongst them were the Eos, Devere, and humans of Mana, but that was not all. Shadow Walkers. Jason mumbled, not sure if his eyes were deceiving him. Yet, even after rubbing his eyes multiple times, he could see the bipedal race in front of him quite clearly. They were shrouded in darkness, except for the glowing, ruby-like eyes to pierce through it. Seeing several shadow walkers stroll around the area was a huge surprise to Jason, who recalled everything about them and what they had done to Argos. They were just a common race, but that didn't make a huge difference because they were simply vile. He was not sure about one of the Shadow Walker in particular whom he still owed a favor for sparing his late master, but Jason knew one thing for certain. It was because of them that the Great Argos War started. This was not exactly the case, but one could say that it was only because one prodigious Shadow Walker had seen him, a halfling, after which they had begun to kidnap hundreds of humans, along with other races. Through this, a chain reaction had been initiated, and somehow, the other races must have taken the Shadow Walker's actions as an offense, causing them to retaliate. In the end, this had caused the Great Argos War. Thinking about the Great Argos War, Jason felt anger flare up within him, which was immediately visible in his Celestia aura that began to fluctuate wildly. The joy and kindness that was normally intertwined with it had momentarily vanished. Only a few moments after his sudden angry outburst, he calmed down before telling himself that he shouldn't mindlessly attack everyone just because they could be responsible for something that caused him great suffering and agony. That was because he himself was not without fault. He should have never existed, in the first place. As such, he had taken responsibility for the world that had never given him anything good. Instead, Argos had become the place he hated the most because he had lost so much on it. Shaking his head, Jason finally calmed down as he distracted himself, averting his attention to something else. Sensing strong energy fluctuations that were also intertwined with emotions like greed and anger, Jason turned in the direction, only to see that a large crowd of people was fighting against each other. This astonished him a little bit because the majority of people were trying to beat a single individual, in order to obtain something. The being had just emerged in the center of the island, thinking that he would be safe here. Just like Jason, he too received a surprise when he saw everybody had the same thought and teleported to the center after receiving rewards. This was the reason why tents had sprung up like mushrooms, because those who had completed the trials successfully had hoped to be secure in the center, which sadly, wasn't the case. Jason was one of those beings who had thought the same, yet, he was glad to have altered his decision a little bit. He didn't want to be teleported to the exact center. Instead, he was somewhere around the outskirts of the center, where only a few tents were located. In the end, this was his fortune, otherwise, he would have been attacked and deprived of everything he had obtained. That was, if they could even do that in the first place, because the rewards Jason had obtained were majorly bound to his soul. Despite his altered destination, a few beings had seen him appear out of nowhere, probably teleported from an inheritance site. However, even after seeing this, those few beings didn't attack him, which was something Jason noticed with a faint smile. It was confusing because he didn't know why they hesitated to attack and rob him, but that was not something he was going to complain about. Nevertheless, he was still intrigued about their reason to leave him alone. Driven by his curiosity, he had almost approached one of the few beings that stared at him but stopped himself. Had he done this, the subconscious cover Jason had built up would have vanished. That was because Jason didn't realize something extremely important. Others might not have bothered about his stigma and celestial aura for a very long time, but everything about the young man had changed after he had broken more than 20 of his minor seals. Not only was it easily perceptible now that Jason's aura and stigma were not artificial or created through a technique, but natural manifestations of his bloodline, they also indicated that Jason was a being of much higher origin than anyone else. Jason didn't even realize that his celestial aura radiated in a radius of more than 50 meters around him. Meanwhile, his fully activated stigma was further intensifying his aura's density, the natural suppression effect, and other characteristics of the celestial aura. All of it prevented most beings from attacking him, knowing that there were witnesses who would most likely report to their ancestors that one of the descendants of a grand race had been killed. Through this, a war could break out, and the common lower, as well as higher races, didn't want to offend a grand race. As such, the most sensible individuals knew that they should back off from Jason, who belonged to a race that was at least considered a grand race. Meanwhile, even the less sensible beings realized that Jason was not to be taken lightly, even if they were to ignore his stigma and aura. That was because Jason's mana fluctuations were on par with beings that had created 8 prismarine crystals, while he, in fact, possessed only a single solidified prismarine crystal. If that was not enough to clearly demonstrate that he was superior to those at the same rank as he was, Jason's eyes were more than enough to make them fall into a trance for a second, without being able to move or do anything. This sensation was created through the chaos energy that swirled through the Emperor's eyes. After annexing the chaos attribute, the best place to store it was the marble behind his eyes, which could store mana, and fortunately, the chaos attribute as well. Thus, the chaos attribute was constantly enhancing his eyes without being used up, creating a gleam within him that was filled with mystery, something that was dark and dangerous. In the end, Jason's earlier worry about being attacked disappeared, and even if he didn't know why exactly this was the case, he was happy about it. Not being attacked, Jason grabbed the opportunity to take a look at the other races. He was interested to see if there were other races like the Preactors that had entered Kinra Island to retrieve something. However, before he could even start his research, Jason's eyes widened in shock as he looked at someone. "Don't tell me, is that? How can she be there?" Chapter 716 to 1 and 1 equals 11 by Hideousgrain. Rubbing his eyes to get a better look, Jason saw a familiar face of a human that was further ahead of him. It was a beautiful woman, and after inserting more mana into his Emperor's eyes, he realized that his assumption had been correct. It really is the woman who had been beside Lux when the three races' embassies had appeared on Argos. Recalling the event of the past, in which his late master had almost been killed, and the secret bloodline of his body revealed, Jason couldn't help but feel even more dumbfounded than before. It had already been a few years, but Jason clearly remembered the time in which Lux had attacked and almost killed him. Thinking about the Necromant, which was the name he gave Lux as someone with a soul world that only accepted undead beings, Jason instinctively looked out for him. However, he was nowhere to be found, which was a relief. Wherever Lux went, problems occurred, and Jason didn't want to deal with more problems caused by him. The Preactors were already more than enough trouble. However, seeing the young woman, who had been at the peak of the mortal stage when he had last seen her, Jason couldn't help but feel astonished. Good cultivation and body refinement techniques really work wonders, especially for those with soul worlds. From the peak of the mortal stage, the young woman had reached the first threshold of the Prisma stage. And that too in only 5 years. Considering that the talent of humans on Argos was said to be extremely bad, this feat was more than a little bit astonishing. However, after considering the effect of a great environment with lots of mana in the surrounding, along with all kinds of cultivation resources and strong techniques, this achievement seemed lackluster. It just showed that humans were not useless and untalented as others said. It was the techniques and surroundings that lacked something. In the end, Jason was not fond of the woman in front of him, but at the same time, she had never done anything against him. His ties to the humans on Argos were also limited because he only cared about the Fleurs and some of his friends. But even then, he had left him to find out more about himself, and his heritage to become stronger, and many more reasons. Unbeknownst to himself, his eyes were glued to the woman from Argos, and it was only when she stared straight at him that he turned his head. Her eyes were poisonous green, and something about them seemed to be different compared to a few years ago. Unfortunately, Jason couldn't remember everything perfectly, but that didn't matter because everything his Emperor eyes had seen was now imprinted into his mind. The past didn't matter, only the present did. And now, it revealed the young woman as a strong combatant with a high amplification which she received from her soul world. Despite him not exactly caring about the woman herself, Jason couldn't help but feel oddly relieved to see someone with a soul world after such a long time. In fact, Jason had already forgotten how much time had passed, but it had to be over a year since he had arrived on Manor. Realizing that years felt like hours to him, Jason couldn't help but smile, thinking that the life of a cultivator was slowly rubbing off on him. This was not bad per se, but Jason also knew that he had to pay attention to himself, and not go into seclusive cultivation for several decades, which seemed to be normal for people at a higher cultivation base. Jason felt that a few months' time was already extremely long to cultivate at once, and he didn't really like it. As such, he hoped that he would always stay busy enough so that it was impossible for him to even consider cultivating for a long period. However, Jason also realized that if he wanted to become much stronger, a long seclusive cultivation period was a must. It was annoying, and the sole thought of it made him visualize this unappealing scenario, only to shake his head. Ignoring the gaze of the woman from Argos, Jason decided to distract himself as he approached the small market set up by the gathered races. Rather than solely entering Kinra Island to enter the inheritance sites, it also seemed to be a good place to socialize with other prodigies and make beneficial business deals. Every region had specific resources en masse. As such, they could be sold with profit to those regions that were in a dire need of said resources. The same also applied the other way around, and with the correct deal, both sides could rake in huge profits. Because Jason realized this as well, he couldn't help but feel astonished that the prodigies were putting 1 and 1 together in order to receive 11. In the end, there were several more advantages to setting up a market in the center of Kinra Island, such as giving the young prodigies the opportunity to independently use their knowledge to purchase and sell goods. As such, the market was extremely beneficial for anyone who wanted to make use of it. Jason was neither, so instead of making use of the market to sell or buy, he just wanted to see what kind of prodigies he would encounter. To a certain extent, Jason wanted to meet Lux too, because he had yet to find the time to give him a thorough lecture about teamwork, using violence, and what would happen if one betrayed their team. Despite that, he couldn't find Lux, but that was fine because Jason believed that fate would bring them in front of each other once again, even if it might take a while to happen. In the end, Jason thought that he had more than enough time, and it was exactly because of this that he left the market. Wasting time was something he hated, and without wealth he could not procure anything, to begin with. Right now, he was poor, if one were to solely look at the number of cultivation stones he possessed. Because of that, it was useless to stay in the market because he didn't think it necessary to socialize with others. Instead, he wanted to enter another inheritance side, where he could possibly acquire something useful. His need for ordinary things was negligible, and it was more of his need for something unique, something that made him much more powerful in a short amount of time that attracted his curiosity. As such, he wanted to enter an inheritance site that was perfectly suited to him. Receiving the main inheritance that was perfectly suitable would increase his strength, thus it was the best he could try to achieve during the next few months. However, before he could leave the center of Kinra Island, he was once again disturbed, which began to frustrate Jason as he heard the familiar voice of a female. "Jason. Is that you? What are you doing here in Kinra Island, alone at that?" Turning around, he saw Miranda with a crowd of people behind her, which almost caused Jason to curse under his breath. "Can I not have my peace?" Chapter 717 Dungeon by Hideousgrain. Jason really wanted to have some peace for himself, and he didn't really believe that it was a good sign to encounter Miranda and the people behind her. They looked at him weirdly, unsure whether they should look at him in anger for wasting their time, or with interest because he might be able to help them. In the end, some chose one reaction while the others took the latter. Yet, Jason could only look at Miranda before he simply asked her, Am I not allowed to be on Kinra Island, Miranda?" He had a faint smile on his face, but it was not difficult to understand that Jason was in no mood to spend more time with them. The tone of his voice suggested this as it sounded slightly off, and annoyed. This caused Miranda to feel a little bit odd, and she recalled the prank she and Leo had played. As such, she couldn't help but think that he acted like this because of the incident. Thus, Miranda didn't mind it that much. Rather, it was better to make up for her mistake while simultaneously reaping as many benefits as possible. Thinking of a way to make amends, Miranda made an offer. "Do you want to enter one of the hidden dungeons with us? We were able to find clues to the location of one and need one more member, and you seem to be suitable." Jason frowned a little on hearing this, knowing that his cultivation base was much weaker than the rest. Miranda was probably the strongest and also youngest of her group, but the others were also at the peak of the Prisma stage. As such, Jason was, by far, the weakest. Through the Emperor eyes, he could see the emotional hue around Miranda and the rest, but that was, unfortunately, not very helpful as the other group members' emotions were fluctuating a lot. That was neither good nor bad, and Jason couldn't be sure how they would react once they found a treasure inside the dungeon. In the end, a dungeon could be like an inheritance trial, a tower with stronger opponents on the higher floors, or completely different. There was no set rule on how a dungeon should look like. However, dungeons were in almost every case constructed by multiple powerful beings that wanted to gather their own inheritance in one place. This was either done to save time, funds, or simply the time to search for numerous suitable candidates. Most people like to enter dungeons much more than normal inheritance sites because both the participant and the artificial intelligence of the respective inheritance could figure out if they were a match for each other. While the inheritance could be given to those that solve even the most challenging task, the participants had the chance to receive more rewards, and find out what exactly is suitable to them. With multiple inheritances put together in a single building, even Jason became interested because he had yet to find out what kind of inheritance was the most suitable for him. However, at the same time, he recalled that Luna told him about two particular inheritances about eyes. One required the participant to already possess special trait eyes, while the inheritance, which was also the one Luna had passed, had enhanced and altered her eyes. Apparently, that was also why her eyes looked different. In the end, Jason was more interested in the inheritance site that demanded him to possess any kind of special trait eyes because it was likely to strengthen his powerful eyes even further. Unfortunately, with Miranda's invitation, he would have to think of a solution first. Given his interest in dungeons, it was not like he wanted to refuse her entirely. As such, Jason approached the situation tactfully. "Do you know what kind of inheritances have been put together inside the dungeon?" His question was normal to ask because it would take months before one would be able to pass through all trials. Because of that, Jason knew that he was likely to enter only one more inheritance site without the need to rush through it to get some rewards. Advancing through an inheritance site was not what Jason planned to do. As such, he told himself that he would only enter one more place, and only if he had a few more months left would he consider another inheritance site to be feasible to enter. But that was only under the assumption that the second inheritance one didn't give him any rewards he could make use of, thus giving him reason to enter another inheritance site. At the same time, Jason found it extremely weird that Miranda asked him, a being at the first threshold of the Prisma stage, to enter a dungeon with them. Either they didn't trust others, were simply inviting people to achieve the necessary numbers, or they wanted to exploit him. Those were the most likely reasons for Miranda and her group to have, according to Jason. As such, he waited for Miranda's answer, only to see her shrug her shoulders. It is a hidden dungeon, so I have no idea what kind of inheritances we can procure there. There are only a few clues, but they're not necessarily true, and might have been falsified by the creators of the dungeon. I have heard some rumors about such things happening before. Miranda didn't seem to hesitate while answering him, which was a good sign indicating that she didn't hold back any information. It was not certain, but Jason felt that Miranda was sincere in her approach to ask him if he wanted to join them. Nodding his head, he partially agreed and had only 2 more questions before he would answer Miranda's request. I don't quite understand why you would ask me to enter the dungeon with you guys. There are hundreds of beings with a much higher cultivation base, and I'm not strong enough to fight beings at the peak Prisma stage. And what were those clues? I don't want to sound rude, but it's unlikely that I can enter another inheritance site after this one, and if the inheritances are not suitable for me, I would rather not join you guys. Jason sounded apologetic, but the follow-up questions were slowly starting to annoy the group members behind Miranda. He noticed this, yet ignored it for the time being. It was not good to have group members that couldn't even control their facial expressions for a short time. Thus, a few scenarios about things that could happen were already playing out in Jason's head. However, he didn't say anything else and waited for Miranda's answer. If I'm not wrong, you should be able to fight against those at the peak of the first threshold of the Prisma stage, right? That's already amazing with your cultivation base. But that's not exactly the reason why I wanted you to enter the dungeon with us. One of the clues stating the possible inheritance you can find within it are rainbow-colored eyes, and when I saw you, I remembered that you have unique eyes too, so I kind of instinctively asked you. Her reason was not really convincing, but Jason was intrigued. Eyes. The fact that the dungeon's clues were eyes was interesting, but the weird change in Miranda's teammates' behavior caused him to feel a little queasy. They were quickly annoyed, and it was almost as if they were putting on a facade. As such, he made his decision based on his gut feeling. Miranda, I have to thank you for inviting me to such a great opportunity, but I will have to decline your offer. Chapter 718 Pulled by Hideousgrain. Jason's refusal was not something Miranda had expected to happen. As such, she stared at him with a baffled expression, only to regain her composure a moment later. She wanted to ask him the reason for his denial, but before Miranda could even say something, her group members were already voicing their anger out loud. What a coward! Running away from a great opportunity, how foolish! Why did we even waste our time with such an idiot? Who cares whether he is the descendant of a grand race or not, he is just a terrified chicken. How can someone as cowardly as this youth be born in a grand race, with special trait eyes? The universe is truly not fair. Jason lifted his right eyebrow when he heard the angered voices of 3 group members, and the 4th was already about to say something when Miranda lifted her hand. She glared at her group members in anger and was about to say something, but held herself back. Shaking her head while sighing, it was obvious how difficult it was for Miranda to make them see things from her point of view. Because of her reaction that was entirely different from what he had expected, Jason concluded that Miranda didn't want to spend more than the necessary time with them. That caused him to conclude that she had either been requested to stay with them, or possibly even forced by her master. All of them were humans from Mana, after all. Thus, the possibility of them hailing from the same place was high. Ignoring their comments, Jason only looked at Miranda before he gave her a faint smile as he used voice transmission to say one last thing. I don't know your relationship with the others, but they seem impulsive. Pay attention to what happens behind your back, I wouldn't trust them a lot. Had Jason not felt uncomfortable about Miranda's group members, he would have entered the dungeon with her. But the dislike for him was clear as day, so he would rather travel alone. This might be more dangerous if he were to be attacked, but from the insult one of the group members had thrown at him, Jason was able to comprehend something he had missed out on before. My stigma and aura probably prevent others from attacking me, in fear of the punishment, or something like that. In the end, this was the only reason he could think of for not being attacked, but at the same time, this reason was only valid if there was a large crowd of people. Without a witness, it was likely for him to get attacked any moment. As such, he decided that the center of Kinra Island was relatively safe for him to be right now. He was still not sure what path he would take, but before making up his mind, Jason bid Miranda farewell, while continuing to ignore the others. After that, he left them for good. Has it been 4 months already since I entered Kinra Island? He suddenly asked himself, trying to calculate the exact time he had spent on the island. Unfortunately, this was not as easy as he hoped because it was quite difficult to tell if the time inside the inheritance site elapsed as it should. Sometimes, dungeons, inheritance sites, or secret realms tweak time, slowing or accelerating its speed within a specific area. This was extremely difficult to achieve, and Jason had heard some time ago that one required tremendous amounts of energy to change the flow of time inside a small room. As such, it was unlikely for extremely old inheritances to have such a place. But at the same time, it didn't really matter as long as the gigantic tortoise island didn't submerge, giving him enough time to spend it however he liked to. First of all, Jason still felt too weak. As such, he wanted to finish constructing the second prismarine crystal. However, that was also something he could do while trying to pass the trials of another inheritance site. It was not like he would be occupied with doing something arduously during his entire advance through trials. With that in mind, Jason subconsciously nodded his head. He also knew that the seemingly endless and invisible strings that were trying to lure him towards them were influencing his mind, affecting him tremendously. All of the invisible strings were pulling him towards different inheritance sites, and probably also belonged to dungeons that were trying to attract his attention. Jason was not sure why they were interested in him, but it had been the case since he had advanced to the Prisma stage. In the end, the feeling of being pulled in all directions only increased after he unsealed more of his Celestia bloodline. Because of that, he believed that the artificial intelligence determined him as a suitable inheritor for their inheritance, just because he had the Celestia bloodline. But that might not necessarily be the cause. This was because, when he advanced to the Prisma stage, a part of his soul world had been released too. As such, the temple inheritance had sensed the racial trait of his human bloodline too. Jason believed that the inheritances were connected to each other and that they were trying to help one another in finding a suitable inheritor. This was only an assumption, but from the intel he had procured from all possible sources in addition to his own observation, it was not unlikely. There were many inheritance sites that had vanished over the course of time, and the reason for this was that their inheritor had been found. The remaining energy and rewards were probably distributed amongst the channels the other inheritance sites were connected to. Jason didn't really have proof to confirm these thoughts he had in mind, but that was the only reason why the dungeon made sense in his opinion. They had many rewards to hand out, but in the end, he hadn't heard about people receiving a main inheritance from there. Only heavenly treasures and all kinds of other rewards had been found, but never was a fate-changing inheritance that altered the constitution of someone discovered. Even Luna didn't receive a full inheritance, but only a fraction of it because she was not suitable for the inheritance. Yet, her eyesight had been enhanced and she had received a heaven-ranked cultivation manual. Adding all the facts together, Jason slowly began to understand Kinra Island's structure. However, it was still a little bit odd that all inheritances had been situated on a single island, or to be precise, a living being at that. What would have happened if the gigantic Tortoise Island had been killed by a stronger powerhouse? Intrigued by all of this, Jason couldn't help but smile as his hunger to understand the situation fully had been ignited. Because of that, he decided to follow his gut feeling, which made him follow the strongest force that was pulling him towards a site. It was not difficult to figure out which one that was, amongst the seemingly countless invisible threads that attracted him, because Jason had to use his entire focus to avoid subconsciously approaching a specific site. Following the pulling force, Jason flew through the air, and he was not sure how long it took him exactly, but after some time he found a pitch-black obelisk that was erected more than 100 meters above the ground. However, Jason was utterly confused. That was not here before. Chapter 719, Dungeon of the Primordial Descendant, by Hideousgrain. Jason hadn't expected the surroundings to change, let alone a pitch-black obelisk to emerge out of nowhere. It hadn't been there when he and Jennifer traveled through the entire island before, and it shouldn't have been constructed by any of the other present prodigies either. Tremendous energy waves were being released by the obelisk, which was too frightening to see. Thus, it couldn't have been the deed of any of the prodigies. They were even more intense than the energy currents of powerhouses at the Spectre stage. This clearly showed that Jason was just about to enter the most dangerous inheritance site. The strong pulling force, followed by the energy currents and his gut feeling, reaffirmed this. But that also meant that it presented the best opportunities and rewards for him to grow stronger, much stronger than he was right now. Approaching the pitch-black obelisk, Jason already figured that it was the place he was pulled to. With that knowledge, he was not even surprised as he saw a bright blue gleaming portal on one side of it, looking like an entrance. However, what astonished Jason were the engraved words on the obelisk above the portal. Those words glowed in a blue light that contrasted against the pitch-black color of the obelisk, making it easy for him to read. Dungeon of the Primordial Descendant. Countless symbols of all body parts surrounded these words, followed by the 3 different cultivation vein symbols that were swept through the purest energy, and many more signs. Just what the hell is that? He blurted out as his celestial aura touched the portal. All of a sudden, he felt a sharp pull that intensified, but Jason was rooted to the spot, unmoving like an ancient tree. His golden eyes gleamed brightly while looking into the portal, only for Jason to ask himself, "Primordial, where did I hear that?" Somehow, Jason felt like he knew something, but no matter how hard he racked his brains, he just couldn't recall it anymore. Whether he had heard or read it, his memory was hazy and his mind didn't allow Jason to remember anything. This felt weird, and the uneasiness increased as he subconsciously took a step forward while his mind wandered off. Forcing himself to stay in front of the portal, Jason wanted to take a good look at all emblems because they released strong energy currents. Jason felt like this was a sign of whether the main inheritance for the specific body part was still present or not. In the end, he was not sure what kind of dungeon had emerged in front of him, but just a few moments later, he heard voices from around him. Because of that, he forcefully moved away, trying to see what others would do first. Oddly enough, it was Miranda and her group members that appeared in front of the obelisk. They didn't notice him because he concealed himself to the best of his capabilities. Landing in front of the portal, Miranda seemed a little bit concerned, while the other group members were smiling brightly. "Let's enter the dungeon right now before anyone else finds it." "Yes. We shouldn't waste any more time. We have made adequate preparations, nothing bad should happen as long as we work together." "Exactly, we don't need someone with a special eye trait. They're overrated, either way." "That's right. We are definitely strong enough to pass all trials, alone. Let's get the inheritance for all the pictured symbols. Afterward, we can show our masters that we are much better than anyone else. If we find a strong inheritance, we might even be able to defeat our seniors, and show them how humiliating it is to be easily defeated in front of everyone. Nobody will ever dare to offend us again." When Jason heard all of this, he couldn't help but think that they were a little bit full of themselves. However, he didn't move a single inch or showed signs of being anywhere around. Instead, his gaze was fixated on Miranda, who sighed deeply as she suggested, "Let's just enter the dungeon, we should only be happy once we find something. What's the use of imagining all kinds of scenarios before anything happens?" Her voice was filled with annoyance, and the other group members noticed this. "Mira, why are you so frustrated? Is it because of that youngster? Just ignore him, we don't need him to pass the trials and be rewarded with treasures." One of the young men in the group said, only for one of the older women to stare daggers at Miranda. "Or do you think that we are too weak without that young boy? Did you really become that weak, or did you fall in love with him just because of his good looks?" Ignoring their words, Miranda didn't take the bait, and she simply approached the portal while shaking her head as she asked, "Is everyone ready, or do you want to waste more time? It's not like I'm allowed to leave you guys behind, but can you guys please be less enthusiastic when facing dangers? It's like you guys want to die, rational minds will always find more rewards." Voicing out her frustration, she turned back to the portal, and jumped through it, leaving her group behind. They could only stare at the portal for a second before rushing after Miranda, without saying anything else. A moment later, Jason came out of his hiding spot, confused about the weird encounter. Just what happened right now? Miranda is really weird too, but those group members are truly a disadvantage. Jason was not sure why Miranda was with them, but there had to be a reason. As such, he didn't think about it any longer. Instead, he felt the strong pull around him and decided to enter the dungeon, following the others who had already disappeared into it. However, just as he approached the portal, and was about to step through it, a robotic voice resounded in his mind. "New participant detected. Evaluation begins." The voice sounded feminine to him, and just after the initial words had been spoken, a mass of energy swept through Jason as he completely entered the portal. 0%, 10%, 0.32%, 65%, 0.84%, 100%. Scan completed. Poor primal human bloodline detected. Celestia bloodline detected. Alteration of cells detected, caused by spiral spirit, prior cursed basilisk, true origin flame, evolving Marist all-devouring moon glacier owl. Cultivation base primal stage, 1 unique solidified prismarine crystal equal to 4 common solidified prismarine crystals. Further amplifications through primal humans' innate trait world of souls. Unique traits: all-seeing eyes, deteriorated, Emperor eyes, soul fraction of Chaos Emperor. Restrictions detected: Celestia bloodline 97% sealed through Chaos Emperor and natural seals. Primary bloodline awakening completed, stigma and aura have been created naturally. Difficulty determined: calamity, highest. First candidate of the primordial's descendants has been found, difficulty increased. Limitation of highest difficulty has been crossed due to participants' capabilities. New difficulty, void, has been created. With the sudden stream of information blasting in his mind, Jason had problems staying level-headed as he unintentionally cursed out, "What the actual fuck, can I leave, please?" He didn't want to enter the dungeon anymore, even less after the last 3 messages that rang through his mind. That's it. Didn't I want to have a relaxing time to cultivate while advancing through the trials of an inheritance site? Unable to move a single inch, he was forced to look ahead, where he suddenly saw a ginormous tower that probably touched the sky, while its width was similarly shocking. This caused goosebumps to appear all over his body when he realized that he was just about to enter the most dangerous dungeon at the highest possible difficulty. However, how could he have known that his encounter with the dungeon was predetermined since ancient times and that his arrival had been awaited for eons, changing the fate of countless beings that would be saved by his grace and mercy? A golden light emerged in front of Jason's eyes, dazzling him, only to appear right in front of the 100-meter-tall gate that was actually the location for his first trial. First trial. Conquer the tower. Time left to advance to the first floor, 15 days. Chapter 720 Jurassic Park by Hideousgrain. Upon seeing the countdown, Jason had a premonition, which only increased when he began to calculate the numbers of floors. Looking upwards, he tried to gauge its height, but he couldn't see the tip of the tower, not even with the use of his Emperor eyes. This caused him to gulp nervously as he muttered in frustration, "Just how long will it take until I pass the first trial? Months? Years?" How could he know that the joke he told to calm himself was, in fact, not far from the truth? Conquering the dungeon of the primordial descendant was not to be taken lightly, and the dangers involved were extremely high. As such, Jason had to be careful with every step he took. Initially, he had hoped to be able to alter the soul energy cycle in his sub-area before solidifying his second prismarine crystal, but that didn't seem to be as easy as he had expected. Jason was also not sure where the other dungeon conquerors were because it was unlikely that they had to conquer the same tower as him. Yet, he doubted that they would be too far away because they were likely to be able to procure the same inheritance as him, or so he thought. Descendant of the primordial. Just what exactly is the primordial? Jason wondered, not exactly sure if the name had something to do with his Celestia bloodline, or something else. Being a candidate of the primordial descendant sounded intriguing, but at the same time, Jason couldn't help but feel a little bit worried. This was because the difficulty of his trials would exceed the limits which the artificial intelligence had, forcing it to create a new one. That was bad, to put it simply, and he became extremely vigilant as he opened the gigantic gate. Stepping through it, he entered the tower while his mind eased up with a single thought. If I cannot pass it, and am about to die, I can still give up and let the time run out. Jason was not someone who gave up easily, and he would rather accept severe injuries, but he could tell if he would succumb to his injuries or survive. Fighting against several dozen beings at the peak Prisma stage, for example, would be his death sentence, and Jason would rather survive than obtain any kind of inheritance. Yet, at the same time, Jason was intrigued by the dungeon of the primordial descendant, which was also the reason for him to feel like trying it out, even if it could take years to advance through the trials. He was not bothered by this, rather, it made everything even more interesting than before. Kinra Island might submerge any time in the following months, but somehow, Jason didn't think that it would affect him. As such, he decided to give his utmost effort to pass the trials, starting with the tower. Taking a deep breath, Jason saw Byakuya emerge in his hand, while Petri entered his mana core, amplifying his strength further. Yet, what he saw once the gate closed behind him, was bright light that dazzled him for a moment, followed by the scent of lush grass and the flourishing nature that hit his nostrils. This astonished Jason, and the moment his eyes adjusted to the bright light that slowly dimmed down, he couldn't help but feel as if he had entered an entirely new dimension. What he saw was an entire plain full of verdant grass with nature at its finest. The most impressive thing was that he couldn't even see the walls encircling the tower. Even after he inserted mana into the Emperor eyes, which solely enhanced his eyesight, seeing everything in a radius of more than 2 kilometers in detail, he couldn't get a clear view. The plain didn't have many elevations, and Jason was able to see even further without the detailed view, but even after that, the tower's walls were still not visible to his eyes. Turning around, he wanted to walk along the walls that should have been behind him, trying to gauge the first floor's size, only to see that both the gate and wall had vanished. Was I teleported away without even noticing it? Jason almost exclaimed, barely holding back from creating loud noises that would attract others. Shocked about the realization that he had been teleported away without realizing it, goosebumps sprang up on his entire skin. Yet, a moment later, he had been forced to accept reality because he saw a group of more than dozens of beasts approaching him. Through the Emperor eyes, he could immediately detect that they were prior beasts at the Prisma stage's first threshold. This was a good sign, and from the outlines of the primordial energy they released, he could clearly see their appearance. However, only a moment later, he saw them properly with his bare eyes too, allowing him to witness the batch of 10 velociraptors that had between 1 to 6 solidified prismarine crystals each. Jason was confident of defeating them in a fight, but there was one thing that bothered him. My first trial is to conquer the tower, and I just need to advance to the first floor. Doesn't that mean I have completed this task already? Or is this floor just the tutorial, or ground floor? It was confusing, but the same count as the question, whether he was supposed to conquer the tower by killing beasts or just by finding the portal that leads towards the first floor. There were too many questions and not a single answer Jason could come up with. As such, he was a little bit helpless, which made him make an important decision. Once I have to kill in order to advance, I will do it. Otherwise, I will just kill those that desire to do the same to me first. He didn't like to be ordered to do anything, but Jason was too selfish to care about the lives of beasts in his current situation. Because of that, he could only make a compromise. He had in mind killing those that wanted to kill him. As long as that was fine, Jason would be too. Weirdly enough, the velociraptors saw him, but instead of being bothered by his presence, they ran past him, minding their own business. Only a few moments later, he heard them issuing unique noises which caused Jason to turn around as he saw a family of triceratops that seemed to have been attacked. I'm not in Jurassic Park, right? Recalling the scenes from ancient movies that replicated the world before the mana outbreak and World Bridge's emergence, on Argos, Jason couldn't help but smile. He didn't have his vision at that time, but his mother had used mana to make him visualize the prehistoric animals that had re-emerged on Argos with the appearance of the World Bridges. Jason had already seen many prehistoric beasts during the last few years, but witnessing how the group of velociraptors was hunting their prey made him feel odd. They were tactically attacking the Triceratops, slowly injuring them, before letting them succumb to their fate. Did they ignore me because I can't feed them, or because they're afraid of me? He suddenly asked himself. However, it was just a moment later that he shook his head. I should search for the portal towards the first floor, otherwise, I will be expelled from the dungeon before I can even enter it officially. He may already be inside the dungeon, but one could also say that he was just in the tutorial and that this didn't count. For Jason, this was the case, and looking at the surrounding beast's strength, he didn't feel that intimidated anymore. Confident about his own capabilities, he turned around. There was one particular hope in his mind, and if that was truly the case, many things would change.